So my interview today is with Garrett Carlson, who I actually found by accident when searching for information about male role models. And I found his website, Dudefluencer, where I understand that he talks a lot about modern masculinity. And I found a couple of articles that he's done on role models from a really, really interesting lens and ideas that you wouldn't necessarily come up with. So the Dudefluencer, first of all, Garrett is a brilliant writer. The way that he constructs his blog articles, it is a joy to read. So I strongly recommend going check out some of those articles. You don't often see the kind of top 10 tips to get a healthy body or anything like that. It's a really in-depth adventure in every single blog. And he brings up ideas that you wouldn't necessarily think about, you wouldn't expect to think about. So it's a really, really good way of being curious about your own masculinity, about your own journey of manhood and what it is to be a man, of finding role models and exploring your own personal identity through his writings, because he doesn't project things onto you, he just opens up doorways for you to explore. So I could not recommend checking out Dudefluencer enough. I think Garrett is a wonderful, wonderful guy, and I really, really hope you enjoy the chat as we explore the impact of media role models. Welcome, Garrett. Thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure. We're going to be talking about role models, male role models, the importance of what they are. Because it's a difficult subject to genuinely do research on.
Yeah.
And I know sorry, go on.
I was just going to say it's incredibly difficult just because there isn't a ton of great information available right now.
And that was actually kind of going to be one of my first questions, actually, because you started Dudefluencer. So you have, and it's an enormous blog, by the way. Wow, you've put a lot of time and energy into producing a lot of high quality, long articles as well. And each one has its own ecosystem. So it looks like you do tons of research into every single topic that you find. And what was your experience when you were kind of researching? I found 3 articles focused on kind of role models. Maybe there was more. I found 3. What was the experience like when researching for those?
So for the main article that I'm going to be referencing right now, the positive male role models, a lot of that research actually came before even Dudefluencer existed. And that came from just really experience looking for myself, looking for people that I could relate to, people that had gone through similar experiences to me, people that I felt like I needed to see when I was struggling with my mental health. So I could see almost not necessarily a way out, but a way through and what that would look like. And that's where sort of that initial research came from, and was kind of part of the genesis of Dudefluencer itself was, man, this was actually kind of really hard to find these people, to find these role models. Maybe I should do a better job of promoting them and getting that out into the world.
Yeah. That's a particularly interesting thing, what you said there, because I had a similar experience with my mental health, like coming out of the other side of a transformation. It's like I've hit a button to say, I want to do better in these core areas. One of them for me was on erectile dysfunction. And yes, you can find plenty of kind of doctors talking about it, but you kind of want to hear stories. You want to hear what people are actually doing with their experience, because it's not just like, oh, go to a doctor, get a pill, fix. It's not that kind of experience. And when I would kind of go, I would find the occasional podcast on the topic, loosely on the topic. I remember one, for example, it was about intimacy and ED. And for the first 20 minutes, the podcast host was talking to a um, a therapist, I think it was, or a coach. And they talked about how amazing their own personal sex lives were for the first 20 minutes. I was like, really? Really, guys?
Yeah, that doesn't sound helpful at all. And I think what you're touching on with erectile dysfunction and mental health and all of that sort of vulnerable stuff for men really struggle to talk about it. So it's no surprise to me that when you find a podcast that talks about erectile dysfunction, they're really just kind of talking about themselves and this more overgeneralized discussion versus really those intimate details, because men in general struggle to talk about those intimate details with each other. So they may not have even been able to internalize or really understand how it affected them in a way that they would be able to communicate it to help others and share with others.
Yeah, yeah. And we're actually going to dive um, into that article that you mentioned and why you chose those people, often because they opened up and they were willing to talk about something. And we're gonna be diving that into a bit, but I'd like to rewind and take a bit of a look at your story to begin with, because I'm always like, we've just said it, right, about role models, about kind of sharing the journey and creating those, almost like not wanting to steal the hashtag, but sharing those moments where other men can say, I've had that experience, like me too, kind of thing. And the first kind of article before we go on to that is 5 lessons about fatherhood from TV dads. And the reason I want to bring this up is you weave in your own dad into the things that you've learned and their connective tissue. So there's the obvious role that a dad plays in terms of the caregiver. But what other roles did your dad take on throughout your life?
So I think to start, one of the things is my dad and I are very, very different. My dad is a mechanic. He loves cars. He loves getting dirty. He loves to build things. I was a teacher for 6 years, so couldn't be farther away from grease and oil and mud. Um, so we're very different in terms of what our passions are, but at the same time, what my dad was able to show me through his passions, through his love of working on cars, was how I should really try and attach myself to my passions and what I love to do. So, in terms of being a role model for me, watching him do something that he loves, and like his job as a mechanic ends at 4 o'clock, he still goes in the garage and starts building a new car for himself. Like he just loves it. And for me, that really showed me you can do something that you love. You can pursue a passion as a career and not like that be it. So for me, when it came to writing, I was able to see, okay, I love writing. It is a passion of mine. Oh, I can do it as a career and, enjoy it still and still enjoy the beauty of it. Um, so I think on that level, that was something really important that my dad shared with me. But also, I remember very fondly, and I don't know if I wrote about this in the story or not. Um, the most memorable moment that I have with my dad, and I don't know if my dad even knows this, so if he's watching, he might be remembering. He and I were sitting on opposite couches, and we watched Big Fish. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie.
I don't
Uh,
think so. Maybe.
uh,
I've seen a lot of movies.
it's super great, and it's a story about a father and son, and the father tells these sort of tall tales, and to sort of spoil the end, it's been out for long enough, I think. Um, the all the stories that his father tells that the son doesn't believe at his funeral comes to be kind of actually true. And it's this bonding moment. And I find myself welling up during this movie. And I look over to my dad, and my dad is the exact same way. And after the movie, we just gave each other this like big hug and told each other that we loved each other. And like that moment is just so symbolic to me of being openly emotional towards your son, towards, another man, and expressing that love uh, in a way that's completely vulnerable. Um, so outside of, that security, the caregiving, those moments of vulnerability and passion really resonated with me. Those are really important to me.
God damn, you brought that up really early as well, because it's funny because I've been doing a lot of work on myself and kind of repressed childhood wounds and things like that. And that is a gulf between me and my dad, is that expression of love. To be honest with you, it's a gulf across my entire family. Which like I'm like, the L word is so terrifying in our family. Like I've dropped it once or twice over the past couple of months. I'm just trying to get better at it and trying to open up those floodgates. But it is a gulf between me and my dad. We would never have that, like that hug, that expression, use those words or anything like that. But, and very similar to you, my dad is an engineer and I'm more on the creative side. So again, like he's constantly building, making, constructing, decorating, painting. I don't know. He's making something all the time. And yet 2018, I was heading to Southeast Asia for a trip. And he's got this huge projector screen and surround sound system and stuff like that. Before I went, because Vietnam was on my trip, we watched the musical Miss Saigon. And we both had that tearing up circumstance together. So it's really interesting how you can get two people, father, son, at two completely different ends of the spectrum in terms of the passion areas that can find that common bond. I'm also really curious though, like, did you have any experiences where you were able to take a massive interest into his passions or him into yours and like have that curiosity part as well?
Yeah, so my dad loves cars and he loves being a mechanic, and that's about it for when it comes to sports. And I remember in Little League, my coach broke her leg, so there wasn't a coach available. And I remember my dad stepping up and being my Little League coach, not really caring about baseball at all, but doing it for me and for my friends. And that passion, that love for me to really invest himself in sort of this world, um, was really impactful to me. And it's something that I was probably 7, 8 years old at the time. So it stuck with me for the past 30 or so years, 25, maybe. I forgot how old I am. Um, so I remember that. And, I remember, so I moved away from home when I was 26, by myself. So I'm about 400 miles away. That's about an 8-hour car ride. So it's not easy for us to, see each other when something happens. But every time I fix something small around the house or in the car, I always call him first to let him know. Uh,
Yeah.
Even if it's something as stupid as like I got a spoon stuck in the garbage disposal, which has happened more than once. Uh, I'll call him and be like, "Hey, guess what I just did? I just took apart the garbage disposal. I have all my fingers still." Uh,
Yeah.
and So that was something that his love of building and fixing things was something that I wasn't really able to understand until I was put into a situation where I needed to do it. And, getting to share those moments, even over the phone, have been really kind of special and nice and memorable to me.
That's really, really. I'm having a transformation while we talk here. So, I've got all these kind of questions planned out and this idea, but I'm kind of having my own little journey at the moment because, um, like it's very easy for me to fix on the differences that I have with my dad and kind of like the space between me and him, right? But like, when you just brought up like those tiny little things, it's so spot on because as an engineer, like I mentioned that my dad's always making things similar to yours. Um, right now, to the left hand side of me is is one of my lights, right? Which is a home custom built light that I made out of cardboard, LED strips, and foil. And like I made the whole thing from scratch myself. And it was like, as soon as I got it made, I was like, "Hey, Dad, check this out! Check out this thing out that I've built," because it's genuinely a good thing. It's like a $100 key light that I made for $15 type of thing. But I never would have connected that. Like I never would have thought that is how my dad is carrying on through me.
Yeah, it's always those little tiny moments that are so difficult to pick up that we often don't even realize that we learn and observe from others. And especially, from my relationship with my dad, someone could look at me and be like, "Oh, so you have no idea how to change a flat tire or change a car's oil? Well, you're nothing like your dad." And, it's more nuanced than that. There are
Yeah.
things that I'm taking on from my dad that I'm happily going to be passing on to my future children. And, even passing down to when I was teaching my students, those little moments were really impactful to me. So part of the beauty of Dudefluencer has been able to really explore and have the opportunity to do that, explore that relationship with my dad and the men in my life in general
Hmm.
in a more detailed level.
Well, let's explore that idea, the kind of other men in your life, because formative years can also be made up of, like my uncle was a big part of my formative years as well, and his personality. There could be teachers, coaches, um, sports coaches, like it can have a different degrees of connection. But were there any other kind of role models within your life that you took things from during that time?
So definitely my grandfather. So my grandfather and father, well, and me, we all lived on an island in New York. So it was a pretty small area. We lived maybe 7 minutes from each other. So I got to actually see my grandparents a lot on my dad's side. And my grandfather and dad have a really, really close relationship. I'd almost say like they're best friends in a way.
Yeah.
Like they're that close. Um, so I learned a lot from seeing that relationship and how they, stay in touch. Also, my English teachers in high school, uh, Mr. Gorman and Mr. Arnone, like they were hugely impactful in my life in just terms of providing me an outlet for writing and for joy in reading and all of that. Really a lot of the people that a lot of the men that I have in my life and the women too, but because we're specifically talking about men, um, part of the reason why they're in my life is because there is something about them that inspires me that
Yeah.
uh, I really look to. My friend Dave, who he has two kids, and watching him be a dad is just awesome. He loves his kids so much, and he's so emotionally honest with them. Um, like I see that, and I'm like, okay, like here's another example. Here's something else that I can look to, when I'm going to be a father. Um, so I think that's really important to me is identifying and spending time with other men where I can learn and grow, and being around them makes me a better person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that, um that concept that could be kind of played with conscious choosing as well, because in your formative years, you don't get those choices, but you can move into conscious thought. But before I touch on that, I was curious, because you moved into teaching, was that role model inspired, or was that more the kind of cliche English degree, what do I do now, teaching?
I would love to tell you that I had that role model thing, but it was absolutely, I have a bachelor's degree. I tell this story all the time. My first job interview, like real job interview after getting my bachelor's degree, I went in for a writing job. It was advertised as a writing job, but they wanted me to be a writer. They wanted me to do tech support. They wanted me to mow the lawn and also get birds out of the attic. Um, and I'm like, this is not a writing job at all. Like, And I went in my car, and that was the only interview I got. I couldn't find an interview for the life of me. And I'm like, oh, I'm working 40 hours at this pizza place, which, like, looking back on, was definitely some of the best times of my life. But at that point, I'm like, I need to figure out what I can do with this English degree. I can be an English teacher. Let's just give it a shot. Let's go for it. And I took the first semester of, I had to take sort of a English teacher license degree for a year and a half, I think, like 4 or 5 courses. And I fell in love immediately. I'm like, this is, I think, what I'm meant to do. And even though I'm not an English teacher or teacher anymore, I think I'm still meant to be an educator at heart.
That's a really interesting idea, because sometimes you can get so caught up in the manifestation of the job rather than the purpose of the job, right? If you want to be an educator, then you have to be a teacher, have to be a teacher, have to be a teacher. But no, there are other ways to be the educator. And part of your story, and I will, when this gets hosted, I'll put the articles where your story goes into more details, because you talk about this is always the challenge, right? Because you talk about so many things so openly around your experiences with loneliness, and with your experiences with was it teaching induced depression or something similar?
Yeah, the teacher burnout.
Teacher burnout, right? Yeah. So many different experiences there we can dive into, and I hope maybe I'll be able to get you back on different interviews to talk about them. But focusing on the topic, you said when you were quitting teaching, saying the kids deserve more. So was there a kind of deliberate awareness in that moment that you weren't able to step up as that role model, as that influence that you were required to be in that time?
Yeah. It wasn't the only factor, but it was a factor. It was me recognizing that the teacher that stepped into the classroom 6 years earlier for his first year is not the same teacher that I was at that point. And I didn't have the energy, I didn't have the motivation. They deserved better. And what I also realized was, I have a passion and a dream to be a writer. What kind of role model would I be for these kids if I'm sitting in this classroom, miserable, unhappy, not pursuing my dream, and giving them a half-assed attempt at a career? Like, what am I telling them by staying here? And it was hard for me to leave. And also, it was 100% the right decision, because I think if my students, and I still stay in contact with a few of them, were to look at me now, I am able to say, I had what was my dream career. I had everything I could have asked for, and I could have easily rode that out for another 30 years and, been done. Like, that's my life. And instead, what my passion was, what my dream was, I realized that is what's important, my happiness. And you should take your happiness and take self-care of yourself. And hopefully that lesson was passed through to them. Hopefully they'll be able to think about it in a couple years when they're a bit older and be like, you know what? I saw Mr. Carlson. He was unhappy in his career and he didn't stay. He went out and pursued something that he loved. I can do the same thing.
Yeah. Which is the lesson that your dad passed on to you.
Yep. Absolutely. It's a circle.
And it's very easy for me to say, as someone who doesn't have kids, to a certain way to operate as a father. So maybe more as a general role model. But I remember interviews for my business years ago. I remember interviewing a guy who told me that he was willing to do anything, right? He was working as a teller at a bank, used to have a digital marketing company, but that went under due to lack of demand, lack of clients. And when he had 2 kids, him and his wife had 2 kids, he sacrificed that to tell Razorback to provide for his children. And they had a 2-bedroom house, and he wanted to be able to expand and buy a bigger house so his kids could have separate rooms. And he was willing to do whatever it took to allow that to happen. And my initial thought is like, that's inspirational that you're doing that, willing to sacrifice yourself for the good of your children. And then as I ruminated on it, I was like, actually it isn't, because the only thing you're actually teaching them is sacrifice, is martyrdom. You're not teaching them to reach for the stars or to follow their dreams. Very easy for me to say that right now, but that's what occurred. So it's nice that you're an example of that flipping around.
And I was also lucky enough that in the situation I didn't have kids. I was engaged. Now I'm married. So the financial issues that could have came from me leaving my career, like I didn't have to worry about that as much. But I think when it comes to those teachers or those people who stick in jobs and who really sacrifice, I think the heart is in the right place, but there's also, you're not just sacrificing your own happiness, but you're also now sacrificing time with your kids. And, those moments that are just as important, in my opinion, watching them grow up and pass on lessons. So
Yeah.
it's a really hard decision to make.
It is. And then from the moment that you quit teaching, you were called to start Dudefluencer. It wasn't the kind of only thing that you were doing in the men's workspace, though, because you'd been doing this for years before you'd even started Dudefluencer. So what was that journey like? How did that start?
So while I was teaching, I was getting my another master's degree in nonfiction writing from Johns Hopkins. And as I was writing, I was realizing these personal narratives were really about my relationships with the men in my life, masculinity, my friends, all of these topics that there just wasn't a lot of writing about. And I love this quote, and I don't know who said it, but it's be the writer you needed when you were younger. And I'm like, okay, I needed this person, when I was 25, 26, 27 years old, lonely, unhappy, looking for something else. So I guess it's my calling, it's my need to be that person because I don't think it's really hard for people to feel something in isolation. It's easy to be like, I'm the loneliest person right now, but there are other people who are lonely too. And, if I feel really lonely right now and I write about it, someone else today, tomorrow, 10 years from now, hopefully will be like, all right, what do I do? They do a Google search, find an article and be like, oh, okay, so I'm not alone right now. There is someone else. And that's kind of where Dudefluencer started, was becoming this outlet of writing for other people who felt the same way as I did.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing for a little over a year officially. I technically started writing about 18 months ago, but I really started taking it seriously last January. And from there, over the course of this year, over the time that I've met different people in this space, I've really started to want to be a voice in this transitional phase of masculinity. I think masculinity, it's easy to identify, it's easy to critique toxic masculinity. I think we have been there for a while. And what I want to do is, all right, so we know what not to do. We know what masculinity shouldn't be. Well, what's the next step? And I think that's the really, really hard part, is identifying it.
Because there are almost some like really generic perspectives when it comes to toxic masculinity. They just seem to kind of get thrown up all over the place. I saw one article actually in the research for this, and I can't remember what I was even searching for to even find this thing, and it said about toxic masculine behaviors, and one of them was being stoic. And it was this whole like hardened shell, don't show emotions. I was like, that's not even what stoicism is. That's not stoicism is. It's I mean, it's logic based, sure, but it also engages with nature and emotion. Like, it's not. So it's like that. Yeah, there's a lot of almost memed content out there when it comes to masculinity.
Mhm. Yeah, the more a phrase like toxic masculinity gets used, the more it probably gets pushed away from its original meaning, and the further away, like, it loses meaning after a time. Because I think of a word like triggered, and in mental health, triggered means a very, very specific thing. And the more often we use it in ways that it is not meant to be used, it loses its power. So when I see a comedian use the word triggered in some off-brand sense of the word, well, that's doing a disservice to what it actually means. And I think the same kind of goes with toxic masculinity. Is every negative behavior around men gets kind of just lumped into what this definition of toxic masculinity is. And I don't think that's the case in
Yeah,
itself.
yeah. And when you were beginning Dudefluencer, because you mentioned about being the writer that you needed when you were younger, that's almost using your future self as a role model, which is a really whole like interesting thought process to go through. I had that recently when I was kind of really struggling for motivation, and my partner said, she said, "What would your 80-year-old self ask you to do right now?" And it didn't immediately fix things, but it started a process. So other than yourself, because it is a space that is newish, certainly quiet, it's a quiet space. Did you use any role models, either content wise or simply as inspirations for starting the blog?
So the models that existed for writing about masculinity, I couldn't identify right off the bat really early on. So I looked at, just kind of in general, a lot of men's magazines, and more importantly, I actually just looked for writing that I thought was great,
Mm.
whether it was about masculinity or not. Like, I just looked for great writing, and I was like, okay, this is what draws me to your article. How can I emulate that? And then slowly over time, as I started writing more of these articles and doing more research, I got in contact with more people. I read different stories. Billy Baker, who's a writer from the Boston Globe, he wrote an article in 2017 about friendship that I read really early on. It was probably like the second or third article that I really wrote for the site. And he wrote all about, being in his 40s and experiencing loneliness, and like not understanding friendship as a male. And like from there, I'm like, oh, okay, like this guy gets me. I get this guy. This is what I want to be doing. And over the course of the past year or so, just interviewing and chatting with different people who have had similar experiences, who have written similar articles. Um, so I really look, and I feel so bad for not remembering their names now. But there's these two gentlemen who run, it used to be called Tribe Men's Group, but now they run a group called Men's Living, which is like a men's support group. Um, and getting to chat with them has been just incredible and amazing. Um, there's another guy named Brock who runs a men's fashion website. And I interviewed him or chatted with him about a fashion article that I wrote really early on. And he and I have stayed in touch, and he's become sort of a mentor role model to me in just terms of the writing space.
Yeah.
So I think it is something that I wouldn't have been able to explore without exploring it for these articles themselves.
Mm, that is interesting, and I think it does kind of raise a good point in that. So often when we think of kind of mentorship and we think of role models, it has to be someone that is so far ahead of the game, this kind of pedestal idea. And that's what happens when you use the word heroes, right? Is you think of a pedestal, and I don't think it has to be the case at all. I think like our mentor has to be Steve Jobs or Tony Robbins or Bill Gates, but no, it's like one of my biggest heroes in life has been my brother, younger brother as well, of all things. There are people close to you that you can genuinely find inspiration from. And that kind of brings us then quite nicely into the 10 positive male role models worth celebrating. And you did pick celebrities here. It sounds like that was the intention of the article. Like, here are people you can follow, if you're going to check out their social media, right? Was this a list based on research in terms of thinking this is what you can broadly see as inspirational characters, or were they like, these are people that I genuinely love, me as Garrett?
Yeah, so there's no one on the list that I dislike. There are certain people.
Start.
Yeah. There's certain people, obviously, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, I adore. I love everything about the guy, which is, I love professional wrestling. So it's an obvious choice that his growth as a human being has been really impactful on me. Trevor Noah, John Legend, Terry Crews, all of them have had some sort of impact on me personally in terms of my thought processes, my beliefs, who I am. And what's been really great is when I first wrote that article, it was kind of difficult to identify 10. And as time has gone on, I've seen that list for me, just like personally, and I think it probably should be updated at this point, grow. I think of moments of vulnerability, like Barack Obama crying during a speech. I think it was about Sandy Hook, the Sandy Hook shooting, being vulnerably shaken up in public as the president of the United States, as like the person of strength, being vulnerable. I think of if I have to go back, I'm going to go back to professional wrestling. There is a wrestler who passed away recently, and there was a tribute show, and this wrestler, his screen name is Eddie Kingston. And if you only were to watch him on TV, you would think he's this bad guy who's just all about toughness. And there was a behind the scenes video of him giving a speech to the rest of the locker room where, and I'm going to quote this as best as I can. He says, tell the people in your life that you love them. Don't be like my old man who waited 50 some odd years to tell me he loved me. I love every single one of you. And just a single, like 4 or 5 sentences like that, I go, okay, like that's something you can take from this guy.
Yeah.
And it is really nice to see popular figures taking it upon themselves to be like, don't be like what my experience was, be better. And I think for a lot of young men, being able to see these actors and writers and just men in the celebrity light be vulnerable, be honest, be good fathers, be open about sexual assault, all of it destigmatizes and normalizes certain feelings. And I think that's probably the first step for really kind of changing the path that masculinity could be on.
Yeah. And I think like one of the core threads about the people that you've chosen, because there's almost like 2 steps with this conversation. There's the step which is being able to talk about the topic, which is what a lot of celebrities are championing, then there's the step where they talk about their own personal experience, where they are vulnerable themselves rather than talking about vulnerability as a concept. And every single one of the individuals that you chose, I think, had that final step. They had their personal journey.
Yeah, and it kind of ties into the podcast that we were talking about at the beginning of the show, is it's easy to acknowledge, hey, like, yeah, I've been sad sometimes. Everyone can really say that without fear of repercussions. But to talk about your personal mental health journey, to talk about, in the case of Terry Crews, to be so explicit about male sexual assault, like that is the vulnerability that is needed for other men to be like, okay, it is okay for me to do this. Because I think in a lot of our our male friendships and our men's groups that we kind of spend our time with, it's difficult to have those conversations still. So if you can see a celebrity, someone on TV, someone in the media doing it, it makes that conversation amongst your friends that much easier.
Yeah. I'm really excited to see who you would pick for your next for your additions for your kind of next 10. Maybe Keanu Reeves?
Yeah, I think Keanu Reeves is great. I think we talked about this when we were having our pre-chat, Robert Pattinson talking about male body image. I think male body image is definitely something that is going to be talked about really soon. And I always hear the phrase manorexia, which is kind of similar to like bromance in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, manorexia. We can joke about that word. It takes away the seriousness of it a bit.
Yeah. It's funny actually, because like manorexia, I've also heard anxiety being used. Mm-hmm. Like bromance, like you said, manpanions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we started with fiction with the TV dads. Well, actually, we didn't really talk about the TV dads, did we? We just talked about your experiences with your dad, but I'll include the article as well, and we can see how that correlates. But then we moved into the nonfiction in the celebrity world, and we're moving back to fiction. Actually, before we do move into fiction, because I'm just really curious, right now, as it stands, who would you say are your biggest heroes?
That's a really tough question, and I don't know if I have an answer to that, because I think I'm someone who likes to take certain aspects of different people's personality and really idolize those parts. I think Terry Crews is definitely right at the top. Because like he is a family man. He's great with his kids, open about mental health, open about his sexual assault. Dwayne Johnson, again, like love everything the man does, except for probably that show Ballers, but we can ignore that. So I think those two are two people that I really, really think about a lot. But I mean, in my sort of day-to-day world, I also think about, just the little moments that different people share. So it's hard for me to say, like,
I know what you mean. It's hard to kind of almost put it in a hierarchy, because you do tend to take small moments, but I think there are certain people within my life that I would elevate simply because of their impact during key moments. And we're just about to move into fiction, but when I was 16, I was an incredibly angry teenager. Like, I would make my mom cry on a weekly basis, listen to heavy metal, kind of long hair, hoodies, baggy jeans, like chains everywhere. Oh, I was brutal. I looks for all different kind of arenas, and they were all dark and morbid. In fact, my friends would even call me Morbid Joe. That was my nickname. Right. Just, and also utterly miserable because, it was that kind of influence. I was being influenced by the music I was listening to. It was very dark. It was very depressed. It was very violent. And I'd gone from A-grade student to rapidly descending, became really rebellious. And I remember reading a book, because even despite this, I would always read. I remember reading a book called Ravenheart by David Gemmell, who's a fantasy. He's known as being a heroic fantasy writer. And the lead character in this book is called Jaime Grimlock, however you pronounce it. But he's this larger than life character that's very principled, high value driven. And I just thought the way that he operated within this book was like, oh my God, I want that. I want to be that. And I was 16 years old at the time. And almost overnight, reading about this character transformed my personality. All of a sudden I was bouncing out of bed going like fist in the air, let's go kind of thing, because I wanted to take on the values and the mannerisms of this individual. I'd just read all of his stories. I was like, oh yeah, if I could grow up to be half the man that he is portrayed to be in this book, I would be happy. And subsequently then I thought, if I can change two people's lives the way that book changed mine, that would be the influence that I wanted to have. And I'm just saying that as a frame, because we don't often think of like fictional characters as being our role models, our heroes, and things like that, but they can be. Just curious about your general thoughts based on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that there are different characters in literature. I think literature is probably the best place to kind of start when it comes to male characters that transcend what is traditional about male characters. And I love hearing that story about how this book really changed your life. Because I
Got
think
me
that
into
is,
creative writing as well, by the way.
yeah, I that is the power of words and the power of sentences and the power of literature. So I think there's nothing wrong with the idea of fictional characters being heroes and role models to people, because I think there is a lot to idolize about them. I think at the same time, it's also important to note, like, they're fictional, so all of their flaws may be covered up by good writing. But
Or
that
the other
means,
way, if it's good writing, the flaws would be clear to see.
yeah, yes, that's also very true. So I think I do think that there has been a trend of male characters that have been much better role models for young men as of late on TV. And that may just be the television that I watch, the sitcoms that I choose to watch. But that has been something that I have actually been more conscious of is, all right, is this character showing vulnerability? Is this male character? What are they talking about? Like, slight digression, I love the Fast and the Furious movies, which is, you watch those movies, it's hyper masculine men, fast cars, women, little skimpy clothing, barely have names. But at the same time, I can also argue about, Dominic Toretto, Vin Diesel's character's love of his friends and family and relationships, and his real life relationship with Paul Walker. Like, all of those things, I can go, I want something like that. Like, that is something for me to look up to, while also acknowledging the flaws of it at the same time.
And that I love that kind of balance between acknowledging the flaws, because I've written down here some classic male role models like James Bond or Fonzie, right? And because they're both very similar in terms of very they've got kind of very strong value systems of like a very high moral code, if you like, but also when it comes to degrading women and womanizing it's very, very, very bad. It almost kind of creates, like, I think it's horrific that it almost kind of creates that these two are, that they go hand in hand. But you genuinely can take the high moral code and not, and have complete respect and honor for women, right? You could take the
Yeah.
good without the bad.
Yeah, and I think it's easier to do in media because they're not real. So like you can watch something and be like, okay, this is a fictional show. This isn't really happening. So it's easier for me to say, uh, here are the things that I can look to and I can love. Um, and then at the same time be like, this is problematic. Uh, and be able to acknowledge it, I think is really important at the same time. Because I think with just humans in general, we have our flaws. No one is perfect. Um, and part of the beauty of life is growth and how we grow. Um, so identifying the good and the bad of things that we love is part of that growth.
Yeah, yeah. It's that hero's arc. You've got to take the villain with the hero. And that brings me to the final article, which was the best male Disney characters of the 2000s. Because to that point, I was literally just thinking there. I was trying to think of like any circumstances where it was a female lead with a male support. I was like, what? Are there any movies like that? Or is it all male lead females? And then I just remembered within that article, Kristoff, right?
Yep.
From Frozen,
Yeah.
takes on that very role.
Yeah. I think that, so I just keep like listing off things that I love in this interview. I also love Disney. And I think that Disney, the key has always been for them, like the Disney princesses. And then with the acquisition of Marvel and Star Wars, they kind of almost reiterated like Disney princesses. These movies are for girls and big action fight scenes are for boys. Um, and it was, for me, important to be able to say, okay, who are the male Disney characters? Because, when my kids are going to be growing up, I want them to be watching Disney movies because,
Yep.
I personally love them. So a movie like Frozen, like I want them to take the lessons they learn from Anna, but also I want them to be able to acknowledge, be able to see a male role model for themselves if that's something they're looking for. And seeing someone like Kristoff is a great example. And I think there just isn't a lot of really great insight or in-depth investigation into the male Disney characters that sort of exist, because for so long it's being seen as either children's or for women, like one of the two, and boys are kind of, we're allowed to ironically like it.
Yes, exactly. Which, like, I'm an unapologetic Disney fanboy, like, absolutely, completely. In fact, so much so that when I did actually have to leave the US after my visa ran out, I could have got a flight direct from Denver back to the UK, which was like $2,000. But if I'd have gone through Orlando, then it would have been a quarter of that price. So I managed to get two flights for a quarter of the price, plus a Disney ticket for a few days, plus an Airbnb for a few days. So I decided my first ever Disney World experience was on my own at 33 years old. Just going there on my own. And I had an amazing time. So like, I'm completely with you, and I love that your choice of who you put on here as well. And I decided to do the same search that you did, because I think you said in researching this, you decided to type in something like top male Disney characters or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the top 2 articles, which I've got written here, are top 10 cutest and hottest male Disney characters. And then BuzzFeed, which I'm probably going to offend someone by saying that BuzzFeed is basically the purveyor of filth anyway. It's just all terrible. 31 Disney guys ranked from nope to yes, I would bang that cartoon.
Yeah. That was exactly what I found, and I am disappointed that I'm still not ranked higher than those 2 articles, because I think there's going to be.
Yeah, I think you were actually ranked 3rd, weren't you?
Yeah. It's not a competition, but it is a little bit. But I think like I wanted to make an article that actually really talked about male Disney characters and really talked about their qualities as, role models for men, and for boys. And yeah, I saw those first 2 articles and I'm like, this can't be real. And of course it is, and it's really unfortunate. But I think what that says is that there is a lot of room for people to really investigate children's programming for male role models and to really kind of look into them. I think back to like the Nickelodeon shows I used to watch as a kid, the Nicktoons and stuff like that. And, I want to really investigate what that media is telling young boys and young men, because I know the action figures that they pick up, the G.I. Joes, the Marvel figures, the wrestling figures, they're larger than life, and they're big and invincible. And Captain America is great, and I think he's a great example for young men, and also at the same time perpetuates somewhat dangerous body image issues.
Yeah, right, because the whole story is about him not being selected, not being picked, not being anything, but still has the same values, still has the Captain America values, and then gets a drug that makes him superhuman and really attractive and big and muscly, and all of a sudden he's selected for everything.
Yep. Yeah. I just think back to like the large muscles on. I have action figures behind me. The large muscles of those toys that I played with, and I'm like, oh, this is what the ideal male body type needs to be.
Yeah. Which ones were those in your circumstance?
So it was a lot of like the G.I. Joes.
Yeah.
Like I was a big G.I. Joe guy, and like if we made them to scale, those people don't exist. Like those muscles would be bigger than my head.
Yeah.
So
apart from maybe in The Rock and Terry Crews.
Yeah.
There's 2 exceptions.
Yeah. I you're completely right. That there just isn't, I don't think there is enough kind of conversation. There is a lot of conversation that needs to be had. And I think that we're just touching the surface of it. We're just getting started.
And I'll include the link to the full article that people can read as well. But you chose like 4 brilliant suggestions. I think like Marlin from Finding Nemo, right? A father himself, like breaking all of his own rules to go search for his son. Like it's proper brilliant selection, that, because it's got so many more extra pieces to it within this conversation about fatherhood and being a male role model. And Christoph, like we've talked about, who actually takes a back seat on the role, and you think that the whole kind of breaking the curse with true love is going to be the female male relationship, but it's not. It's actually the sister. So he takes a complete backward step, and yet is a excellent character in his own right. Then there's Lightning McQueen, who goes through his own journey of finding Doc Hudson, who is a male role model that helps him learn so much. And then Barley, that takes the big brother role, which is a whole different male role model dynamic. So I just think that they were four brilliant selections. Do you want to say anything on that before? Because I'm going to include the link as well.
So I think with those characters, and the reason why I was very specific about the 2000s was it was hard to find characters before the 2000s that I thought were really well done male characters. And all four of them are either Pixar, I think three are Pixar, two are Pixar maybe. And the other two are Disney 3D studios. I remember not wanting to watch Cars for the longest time, and my wife sitting me down and being like, Garrett, you need to watch Cars. You need to understand stuff about friendship. Like you need to learn some more stuff from this cartoon talking car. And watching it at the end, I'm like, oh my God, like I get it. Like this is so brilliant. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love Disney movies so much is they are able to not only to speak to young men, but also I think on a deeper level, talk to adult men too. I don't know if you saw Soul since it came out, I think on Christmas.
Oh, not yet. Worth it?
It absolutely. But that's one of those movies where like, I'm sure I would have liked it as a kid, but as an adult, I really liked it. I really got it. The same with Up. I tell everyone, I'm like, if you haven't cried in like 3 times in the first 20 minutes of Up, then
yeah.
It's those things, those moments that I think Disney movies are really able to capture is like, it's a kid's movie on the surface, but for adults, we're able to take these life lessons from. And that is the beauty of good writing, of quality, just art in general.
Yeah. I like the fact that we've weaved in so many kind of subtle talks around storytelling as well in this, because I've been studying heroes for quite a while, accidentally almost, ever since I read Beowulf at university. But that's a whole different topic that we won't go into yet, because my last 2 big questions is big summary, because ultimately you've been studying men's work, masculinity for a significant length of time. What would you say are kind of like the core lessons that you've learned about heroism and role models?
So I think heroism and role models don't need to be big, grandiose. As I think you said earlier, pedestal people. I think role models, mentorship, heroism is really the things we see in our everyday life that we're able to pick up on. It is the kindness of a stranger. It is the small lessons that we're able to pick up from our family members, from our friends. Watching my friend Dave with his children, like watching him be a father and be such a good father, like that is a moment of mentorship, of being a model for me. So in terms of heroism and mentorship and role models, it's the little things that really, really have a big impact. And too often we see role models as like, the classic John Wayne gunslinger type. And it's easy to put that on a pedestal because so much of that character, so much of that arc is impossible to achieve. So it's easy to put that on a pedestal. But the truth is, like, we are all heroes. We are all role models to someone. And that is a role that each of us play for not only ourselves or our friends or our partners, but also an entire generation of young people who are growing up too.
That's perfect. Again, the storytelling taking on a role. There's like a mic drop right there. But we've got one more question. So it always happens. The mic drop comes at the penultimate question. And so this question throws people. So if there's thinking time, I can edit it out. And the question is, what is one question or idea that you never get asked about but would like to?
Oof, that is a good question. I think the one question that I always love to answer, and I rarely get asked, is like, what is the next step of masculinity look like? Because women have been talking about what it means to be a woman in feminism for 50 years, and men haven't had the dialogue yet to be able to have those conversations. So it's really just starting for us.
Yeah.
To redefine masculinity. And part of why I love this question is because all I'm trying to do is just throw my voice into the hat, because what I value about masculinity and what I see masculinity being isn't the only way. I think in a lot of ways, masculinity and femininity, there are, when we really boil it down, it's just human qualities of what we want the ideal human to be. And I think when it comes to the next step for masculinity, I think it is taking on those more vulnerable roles, those open roles, and in doing so, leading to healthier men, healthier communities, stronger communities, all of those little things that are really, really impactful. And again, I'm just a voice. The only thing I can provide is my experience, and my experience comes from my own life, and not everyone has experienced masculinity and life the same way that I have. So I think I kind of roundabout answered your question.
Yeah, which kind of highlights the concept that I've been thinking a lot about around trusting your own experience. Very much so. But no, that is absolutely brilliant. I really, really appreciate it. I think we've covered off a lot around storytelling and role models. There never needs to be another discussion about role models ever again. Now that we've gone, no, only
completely
kidding.
Done.
Yeah, completely done. But Garrett, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us your wisdom, your experience. I hope to have you on to share more about your journey.
Absolutely.
As well in future discussions, for sure.
Thank you for having me on. This was great.